Lucky. Glenise and Caraway sit on the deck in front of Shea Bay Cafe. As always, they enjoy the bayfront, even the fog, which will soon vanish to unveil sparkling water, gulls, and fishing boats. They do not mind the smell of fish, nor the rowdy crowds of summer. They savor these things, along with their morning coffee and newspaper. The newspaper is mainly a prop because, like most women of their generation, they carry smartphones the size of the pocketbooks they used to read. They can keep track of everything they care about on crisp, touchable screens via the internet. Shea Bay Cafe provides outstanding Wi-Fi. However, while some local events do not find their way onto the cyber highway, these may well make the pages of the Takema Tatler, a local paper also affectionately called the Crab Wrapper. As Glenise reads one such account aloud, their eyes blaze with excitement. "Oh my God!" Caraway interrupts. "It's Lucky! It has to be! I never doubted he was out there." She. Lucky is a she, corrects Glenise. "Whatever," says Caraway. "Did anyone ever see it? Did they get a picture of it? Somebody must have taken a phone picture. What about video?" "Let me finish," says Glenise. She concludes the short article, but there is nothing about any photos or videos. The incident happened before dawn yesterday. So far, no witnesses have come forward. Only one survivor managed to swim ashore. Caraway was busily tapping her touch screen and sliding through images and text as if hunting gold. "I found it!" she cries, turning her smartphone so Glenise can see the sun-drenched green and blue image of a long-necked reptile. Lucky. "So," says Glenise, "Lucky has her place among the thousands upon millions of images lodged in cyberspace. So finding this one is unnoteworthy." "Somebody sent this picture to the Puffington Host," says Caraway. "Listen to the write-up. Takema Bay drownings attributed to ancient sea monster. A small fishing vessel on an early morning crab run mysteriously capsized this morning in moderate seas off the Oregon coast. One survivor, 2 lost and believed drowned. Some say the incident may have been caused by a legendary sea monster locals call Lucky." "Go on," says Glenise. "That's all there is," says Caraway. The excitement on their faces turns to disappointment. They sip their lattes and zip their jackets as the morning breeze picks up. "I guess we'll never know for sure," says Glenise. It is a recognized fact that reports of a sea monster in Takema Bay date back to the late 1800s. You can find some of these accounts at the Takema History Center, where crumbling handwritten letters and a few yellowed copies of the Takema Times, now defunct, describe a long-necked reptile rising out of the bay on a fog-veiled morning, or possibly a sea serpent menacing small boats. "Lucky never actually killed anyone," says Glenise thoughtfully. "Not that we know of. Not until now," Caraway adds. Caraway is a retired theater arts teacher. She is a heavy woman with meticulously manicured nails and careful makeup. Glenise is the widow of a fisherman. She used to teach school. They are of uncertain age, but clearly past retirement. Both have haircuts like young boys. Both wear windproof jackets. They have made a hobby of researching these sea monster stories, hoping to find irrefutable proof that Lucky exists. They are regulars at the Tacoma History Museum and have become masters of microfiche in their quest for lucky stories. They might write a book someday. Caraway once found a 1940s front page account and photo of a capsized sailboat being towed upriver toward the boatyard. The 5 survivors were consistent in their claim that the boat was swamped by a giant water snake that had circled the boat, raised its head and stared into their faces, then glided underneath, arched its back, and caused the boat to roll over. No one was injured or lost, as all 5 were excellent swimmers. Glenise had later discovered that, in fact, the survivors did not have to swim for it. They had never left the boat at all. They clung to the capsized hull until rescued by a Coast Guard crew who happened to witness the whole incident, minus the water snake. The sheriff's report, also omitted from the front page write-up, stated that the 5 had been celebrating the boat owner's birthday and had consumed substantial quantities of sparkling wine prior to the upset. So far, Glenise and Caraway have found that most dramatic stories similarly discredited whenever they dug out the facts. Sometimes the legendary reptile was reported rolling along the coastline in distant breaking surf, and a few sightings of a giant river snake on the Tacoma River have been reported. But most sightings had been in Tacoma Bay, that jewel-like estuary sparkling before them now. In the courtyard at Oceancraft Mall, a fanciful model of a long-necked, web-footed sea lizard looms benignly above the shoppers. Its wooden plaque reads, "Lucky, Tacoma Bay's own Loch Ness relative. First sighted in 1850. That's what the plaque says. But the earliest recorded sightings that Glenise and Caraway have found was in 1940. A week passed before more details of the most recent incident appeared in the Tacoma Tatler. Glenise and Caraway already had most of the story by then. They were aficionados of idle gossip and devout followers of local Facebook friends, so they rarely missed anything of importance in their community. The fishing boat Grinch had turned over in surging waters at the Tacoma Bar. The lone survivor was crew member Aaron Vanderswift. The other 2 on board, whose bodies had not been recovered, were crew member Helena Vanderswift, Aaron's wife, and the boat owner, Roger McBride. Vanderswift said he felt the boat rise out of the water and hang motionless for a moment before capsizing and dumping him and presumably the rest of the crew along with the crab pots into the sea. Vanderswift lost track of everything in those roiling waters, barely making it to the jetty. He clung to the rocks until a Coast Guard boat pulled him aboard. All of this was reported in the Tatler, but there was much more to the story, as Glenise and Caraway knew. Of course there was. The skipper, Roger McBride, and the other victim, Vanderswift's wife, were having an affair, according to reliable bayfront gossips. The question is, did Aaron Vanderswift know about the affair? Said Glenise. I knew about it. You knew about it. Just about everybody who comes in here for coffee knew about it. How could Aaron not know? They were again sipping coffee at their usual post on the deck of Shea Bay Cafe. There are none so blind, said Caraway. That's true, said Glenise. You don't see what it is more convenient not to see. Anyway, Aaron's an alcoholic. He really didn't care about anything but having enough money to get drunk on. Crab season came late this year, and he had draws he'll have to work all season to make up. If he did know about the affair, it wouldn't have done him any good to make a ruckus. He'd probably just get fired. True. Do you think he really felt the boat come out of the water, or did he just make that part up? Said Caraway. If he was drunk, he probably couldn't tell the difference between the backwash of the bar and the backside of a sea lizard, said Glenise. They both laughed. Do you think it really was lucky? Maybe, said Glenise. They didn't run aground. Maybe because McBride, he knew the bar. He was a third-generation bar pilot. His dad and his granddad did too. The seas weren't that heavy. Something made the Grinch turn over. Could have been lucky, I guess, if you believe what Aaron claims. Nobody actually saw the Grinch capsize, and nobody had seen anything like a sea monster in the estuary for years. But in the week following the Grinch incident, mysterious objects in the bay and suspicious wave formations at sea near the Takema Bar were spotted. Videos showed up on YouTube. Others were deposited in the mailbox of the Marine Science Labs. The Tatler reported them all as possible sea monster sightings. Sightings sell papers, observed Glenise. "20 days after the Grinch incident, Aaron Vanderswift was arrested and subsequently arraigned on 2 counts of manslaughter. I don't think he did it, said Caraway. He's a drunk, that's all. What good would it do him to scuttle the Grinch? That boat was his only source of income. Nobody else will hire him. Glennie said, Of course, he got unemployment right away. Well, he didn't kill his own wife and turn over the Grinch just so he could get unemployment, did he? But I just wonder how they think he did it. It's not that easy to capsize a boat like that, is it? Said Caraway. It happened on the bar, said Glenise. Sometimes it's harder to keep a boat upright out there than to swamp it. This was true. Swamped boats are not uncommon on the Oregon coast, and not on the Takema Bar, where considerable skill and a special license are required for a bar pilot. Both Aaron Vanderswift and Roger McBride were so licensed. Caraway and Glenise decided to attend the trial. They drove 60 miles and shared a room at a motel in the county seat so as not to miss a single minute of it. The start of the trial was a farce because the prosecution appeared to make its central issue the non-existence of a Takema Bay sea monster, and thereby to establish the impossibility of it having overturned a fishing boat, even a small one like the Grinch. The prosecution brought in 11 witnesses to refute the existence of sea monsters, at least in the region of Takema Bar. Witnesses included longtime mariners who had never seen one, marine biologists who asserted that Lucky's likeness in the Oceancraft Mall represented no known species, extinct or otherwise, and one forensic photographer analyst who debunked recent videos and photos of said sea monster. Any juror without prior knowledge of the case must have been puzzled at this testimony, as the defense, in her opening statement, had never mentioned such a creature, nor hinted that it played any part in the incident. But on cross-examination, these witnesses all conceded that they could not eliminate the possible existence of an unidentified marine creature capable of capsizing the Grinch. "That prosecutor is a silly man," whispered Glennice. "You cannot prove non-existence. Everybody knows that." Once the sea monster testimony concluded, the trial moved rapidly. The next witnesses swore that the accused had not been drinking anything stronger than ginger ale prior to boarding the Grinch that evening. Indeed, he had been stone sober for at least 4 weeks at that point. They knew this because they worked on the docks with him or had seen him at sober functions. Aaron Vanderswift, seated beside his attorney, clean-shaven and attentive as he watched the proceedings, jotted entries in a spiral notebook. Wearing a brown suit and tie, hair trimmed above his ears, and freshly shaven, he looked almost ministerial. If Glennice and Caraway were not so well acquainted with him, they would hardly have believed he ever drank or ever set foot on a fishing boat. "Did he join AA?" Caraway whispered. "Maybe," murmured Glennice. The prosecution called Aaron's landlady. She looked to be in her late 40s and came forward with a firm step and much self-assurance. She testified that Helena, Aaron's wife, and his boss, Mr. McBride, had frequently spent hours alone in Aaron's apartment, generally when Mr. Vanderswift had been absent, drunk on his ass, and didn't stagger home until much later. Yes, she knew Mr. Vanderswift well, knew him to be a blackout drunk when he drank, but she had not seen him in that condition for some time. Did the landlady ever see any signs of anger or abuse when Mr. Vanderswift was inebriated? "Nah, he was a pussycat when he drank. He'd stumble up the stairs and collapse. Sometimes I had to help him get into his apartment. He was never nasty or belligerent, not when he drank." Did the landlady ever witness him reproach his wife or his boss for any reason while drunk? "No, I never, not that I saw. I don't think he knew anything about their carrying on, not until he stopped drinking. When he found them out, he had plenty to say then. He told Roger McBride that if he ever touched his wife again, he'd kill them both. He shouted it. I guess everybody in the building must have heard him." Glennice and Caraway gasped and covered their mouths. The courtroom cacophony that followed was impervious to the bailiff and the judge's gavel. The judge called a recess. "That just seems like a normal reaction," said Glennice later. "He probably didn't mean it." "Even if he did mean it, that doesn't mean he did it. Doesn't mean he capsized the boat," said Caraway. "I mean, he was all fired up and mad when he said that, if he did say it, you know. Do you think the skipper would have let him on the boat if he was out of control like the landlady said he was?" "No, of course not," Glennice agreed. The last prosecution witness was the Takema pawn shop owner, who testified that Aaron had purchased a handgun from him. The defense called a string of witnesses who insisted that Aaron never knew about the affair. Many said they doubted there ever had been one, the landlady's testimony notwithstanding. More than one volunteered the opinion that Skipper McBride was too level-headed to mess around with a crew member, or the wife of a crew member. McBride was a family man himself. Indeed, McBride's widow, Melanie, had been in the courtroom every day so far. She sat in the last row, watching intently and speaking to no one. On the matter of Aaron's drinking, witnesses also differed. Some said Aaron never had any problem with alcohol, imbibing about as much as any other seasonal fisherman. One or two had noticed when he stopped drinking, though. Others said he did occasionally tie one on, but nothing out of the ordinary. They all agreed that Aaron was not the kind of man to threaten anyone or do anyone physical harm. He was a nice guy, they said, and he would never scuttle a boat no matter how mad he got. It just wasn't his nature. The final defense witness was a police detective who testified that they had found no firearm nor ammunition when they searched Aaron's apartment, nor among any of his other personal belongings. Unexpectedly, Aaron took the stand. He gave a detailed account of that night. When he got to the capsizing, he said that something had lifted the boat from underneath, clean out of the water, causing it to tip starboard and roll over. He himself had fallen into a pile of crab pots and been washed about like a jellyfish in the surge as the ocean rushed in. He managed to pull himself over the rail and dive clear of the foundering boat. He thought it was going down for sure, and then he swam for the jetty. He saw no sign of either his wife or the skipper. He was calm and consistent under cross-examination, admitting that he had suspected his wife was having an affair, but he didn't know with who. And who could blame her, married to the drunk he used to be? But once he got sober, and he had been sober for 4 weeks at that time, things had smoothed out between them, almost like a second honeymoon. No, he had no resentments against McBride. He and Helena had worked for him off and on for years, and he'd always been a fair and decent boss. With a sneer, the prosecutor asked Aaron if he thought a sea monster had overturned the boat. Aaron said he didn't know what it was. He thought it could have been a rogue wave, or an orca, or some other kind of whale that visited Takema Bay on rare occasions, or a sea monster, for all he knew. He never saw it. The jury took only 1 hour to acquit him. Driving back to Takema Bay on the day after the trial, Caraway read aloud from a local paper. At least one juror felt that Aaron Vanderswift might well have killed his wife and her lover and allowed the boat to capsize, but there was simply no proof. None. Vanderswift's story was plausible enough, and he really had nothing to gain. "We don't know any more than we did," said Glennie, skillfully navigating convoluted curves of the 2-lane highway. "The verdict sort of confirms that Lucky is out there, in a way," said Caraway. "I mean, you could look at it that way." Glennies gave a snort. "Or it could mean that a Japanese submarine capsized the Grinch." "Ha ha, yeah," said Caraway. "You're right. Do you think Aaron was telling the truth, though? I mean, about the way the boat went over?" Even after the trial, hardly a week went by without a sea monster sighting, either in Takema Bay or at sea beyond the bar. Reports came from fishermen, school children on field trips, tourists, and even from the Coast Guard. But such reports were dismissed out of hand, even by Glennies and Caraway, who had become intrigued with other aspects of the incident by now. First of all, there was Aaron Vanderswift, who not only continued to wax sober, but showed up at their church, all dressed up as he had been at the trial. They couldn't recall seeing him there before, but others assured them he had been attending for at least a month before the swamping of the Grinch. Then there was the Grinch itself. It was floating upright now, bilges pumped, and otherwise set right in every aspect, including fresh paint. It was docked within view of the Shea Bay Cafe and wore a prominent "For Sale by Owner" sign. "Looks like Melanie is selling the Grinch," said Caraway. Pretending to try, anyway," said Glenise. "I looked up the listing. Nobody's ever going to buy it at that price." Nobody did. Eventually, McBride's widow hired a skipper and sent the Grinch back to sea. Melanie was well enough off that she didn't really need the income. McBride's life had been insured, and Melanie owned a hair salon up on the hill that did all right. Her 2 children were out of the nest and pursuing happiness in other cities. There was still plenty to keep gossip from being idle once the Grinch resumed operation. The new skipper was Aaron Vanderswift. Never thought he'd set foot on that scow again. He ever been a skipper before? Well, he had been. He'd been a respected skipper and a skilled fisherman before he turned into a staggering souse that no one would hire. No one except for McBride. Last man I thought Melanie McBride would hire. He already scuttled that boat once. People who said this knew better. Melanie's own husband had been piloting the Grinch when she capsized. Still, that kind of remark keeps the gossip mill turning. It was salmon season, and the Grinch was pulling them in and making money. Pretty soon folks got used to sober Aaron Vanderswift, skipper of the Grinch. In time, Vanderswift moved into the handsome home that Melanie McBride had once shared with a different man. But what could be said about a respectable widow partnering up with the skipper of her fishing boat? The most natural thing in the world, wasn't it? The gossip mill didn't stop, at least not on that subject, though it was fueled only by innuendo and suspicion. "Something's not right," Glenise whispered to Caraway. They had seen the couple show up for church a time or two, had seen them breakfasting right there in the Shea Bay Cafe. It was obvious they had more than a working relationship. "It's all natural enough," said Caraway. "I mean, with them both widowed and all." "Oh, sure," said Glenise. "It still looks weird to me. He's the man they just tried for his wife's and her husband's manslaughters. Now there they are, like a pair of lovebirds. Don't you think it's weird?" "It's weird," said Caraway. Maybe it was because of Glenise's fondness for murder mysteries and true crime stories, but her own thoughts ran beyond puzzlement to the accusatory. She thought the whole thing had been a setup, that a deliberate long-range plan had been executed. Result: 2 deaths, no bodies, and 1 survivor. And there were the merry widow and widower frolicking on the bayfront for all to see, shamelessly. Suspicions? Abound they might, but nothing could be done about them. Glenise thought double jeopardy would protect Aaron. He could not be tried a second time, not for manslaughter. But murder? Glenise thought murder might be a whole new proposition. She would ask her aunt, a retired court stenographer, if she ever heard of such a thing. But what was the point? There was no more evidence now than had been presented at the trial. Heaps of suspicion, but no evidence. The layers of inference and half-truths from which a true account might have been extracted had multiplied with time, so that by now, without physical evidence, further resolution was impossible. Weeks passed. Speculation dwindled. The salmon season was good. Good weather held, and tourists kept the town flush until almost Thanksgiving. Melanie's salon was acclaimed as the #1 beauty spot in Tacoma. She added tanning booths, spa tubs, and a staff masseuse. In time, the gossips grew bored, then lost interest entirely. Glenise never spoke of her premonition that some day a dredging operation would turn up a pair of skulls with bullet holes in them from the depths of Tacoma Bay. A year rolled by. Things were looking rosy for the Vanderswifts, Melanie and Aaron. Caraway and Glenise observed that Melanie was driving a brand new Lexus and Aaron hauled his crab pots in a new Silverado. Nowadays, the swamping of the Grinch is rarely mentioned, but sometimes the gossips enviously remark on Aaron's sudden and visible success, noting that he sure was lucky.